Today on This Is Horror podcast, we are talking to Gwendolyn Kiste, who will soon be releasing The Haunting of Velkwood. Gwendolyn, welcome to the show. How are you
Thank
doing?
thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I'm doing well, doing well. Cold. It's cold where I'm at. I'm in Pennsylvania, so it's cold
Yeah,
here, but yeah.
it's cold here in Japan, but I've got a little heater right by my legs, so it's making it a little bit warmer.
Smart move, smart move.
Yeah. But it's actually been a number of years since we last spoke to you. It's been longer than I thought it had been because I checked, and the last time we spoke, it was in June 2021 for
Yes.
Bone Set and Feathers.
Yes. Wow. Yeah, that was a long time ago. Yeah. Different world it felt like back then. Although, I feel like we were all still in quarantine more than we are now, so I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, on that note, I want to know what have been some of the changes for you, both personally and professionally, in that time?
Oh, wow. What have been the changes? I mean, I feel like the world is constantly changing around us. So you're kind of changing in response to all of that. But yeah, I mean, I released my follow-up novel after Bone Set and Feathers. So that was Reluctant Immortals. I was very happy with the reception that it got. It got a Lambda Literary Award and also a Bram Stoker Award nomination and a Dragon Award nomination. So that was really exciting. And yeah, released a lot of short fiction since then. I love short stories, so that's been really nice. And yeah, now on to my fourth novel. I can't believe I now am going to have four novels. That's wild to me. I don't know where the time has gone.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, last time we spoke, you had a kind of new routine in that both you and your husband were working from home. I think you were just adjusting to that at the time. So, is that still the case? Have there been any changes or further adjustments that you had to make to kind of optimize that routine?
I feel like we've really settled into it now. He is still working from home. He's actually working right now. He's working upstairs. So I'm downstairs and he's upstairs. We're both working on different floors. Yeah, I mean, it's been good. Hopefully he'll get to continue working from home. I know a lot of people have started, like the offices have been calling everybody back. So we're hoping that, hopefully he can keep working from home. We definitely did adjust fairly well to it. So we like it.
Yeah, I feel that everything that happened and continues to a certain extent to happen with COVID and the pandemic, it has changed the world in so many ways, and
Yeah.
perhaps none more so than in terms of the way in which people work. And I mean,
Mhm.
even in
Mhm.
places like Japan, which the idea before of working from home was almost like a foreign concept, literally a foreign concept. But
Yeah.
now there are more people working remotely here. There are people in the UK. It seems to be the norm, in fact, where instead of going into the office 5 days a week, you will go in maybe like anywhere between 1 and 3 days a week. It seems to be more normal to have that remote working pattern. And I think that is a change actually for the better because it always seemed to make sense anyway to me. I mean, so many jobs, you're doing it on a computer. So why are you spending that time and money commuting into the office?
Yeah. Yeah, I would definitely agree. I feel like people are happier working from home. It's a familiar environment. At least a lot of people. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there like, no, I hate it. I want to go back into
Mm.
the office. I need to get away. I need to separate my home and work life, which there probably is something to be said for that. But I definitely like it, especially this time of year when it's this cold and there's snow. It's like, I don't want to go anywhere if I don't have to.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, you said that you had been writing a number of short stories as well. So I'm wondering, what does that look like in terms of balancing your longer fiction and short stories? And are you simultaneously working on both, or do you have to be done with a longer project or in between drafts before you can write a short story?
I'm not really sure. That's a good question. It feels like, after I finished Haunting of Elkwood, like I have taken off, I took off about a year from novel writing and just wrote short fiction and then short nonfiction because, like, I loved writing Velkwood, but it took a lot out of me emotionally. So I'm like, I need a break. I need like short fiction can be really fun to kind of go into a world and go back out again. And so, I've spent a lot of time, writing short stories for that reason. But most of the time I can be in the middle of a short story, and working on a novel or a novella at the same time, usually. I still feel it's my fourth novel, but I still feel new in a lot of ways to novel writing. Whereas with short fiction, I've written like well over 100 at this point. I feel like I understand it a little better. Novels are still a little mysterious to me. There's still like how do you get through it? How do you really do it? It's so big. It's such a larger project than short fiction.
Well, then that begs the very direct and literal question. I mean, how do you do it? And what does your planning or lack thereof process look like?
Yeah, what's also been strange to me is that for all four of my novels, I've kind of approached them all very differently. I remember with The Rust Maidens, I actually wrote this very long outline. It was a 17,000 word outline, I believe, and sent it over to my editor and, made sure, like, okay, like, let's troubleshoot any problems right away. And then with Bone Set and Feathers, I didn't do a lot of planning. It was just maybe a couple pages of notes, and that did take a little bit longer to get through. And then Reluctant Immortals, I went back and did about an 8 to 10,000 word, outline. And then with Hunting of Velkwood, I kind of again did more of a shorter outline. So like a little bit more in depth than maybe Bone Set and Feathers, but not quite as much. So I feel like it's been all over the place. I feel like I said, I feel like I have more of a standardized kind of way of approaching short fiction, but with novels, I'm like, let's see where this goes sometimes, or other times like I'm going to know every single beat of this story before I write it. So
Yeah, I find trying to get the optimal word count for my outline to be a constant battle because if I plan it too much, then it almost takes the joy away from the actual writing of it. But
mm-hmm.
if I don't plan it enough, then I'm wondering, well, where are we going? It's like just getting in the car, driving somewhere, but not knowing where you're actually meant to end up.
It's so true. I agree so much. I feel like with a short story, if I don't know where it's going, I'm not going to get lost. Like it's like driving across town as opposed to driving across country, as if using the metaphor you were just saying. And so it's like a lot easier to not plan with short stories, and you can kind of let that magic happen on the page. But I love the point that you made because I struggle with the same thing of like when it's a longer work of like, do I don't want to plan everything because there is that magic. And that's something I love about short fiction, of allowing it to happen on the page and being even a little surprised as an author of like, oh, this is where these characters are going. But then balancing that with, I don't want to get lost halfway through.
Yeah, that's my problem with outlines is I tend to I probably do them too much. The last time that I did one, uh, I didn't want to write it anymore. I was like, I already wrote this. I don't want to do it no
Yeah.
more. And so, I mean, when you say that it can cause a problem like that, then what do you how do you know how far to go? It's like you got to leave yourself a little bit of mystery, but you don't want to have like these little 3 word bullet points, and then he died, and stuff like that. I mean, to me, it's like I get lost in the details, and so it's like where is that cutting point? That's like a rhetorical question. I guess it's going to be different for everyone, you know. But
Yeah.
you got to leave yourself a little room for play. That's the
Uh-huh.
way I see it. Just like, okay, I got a little room here. I can play around with this, but I'm kind of getting back into outlines. I'm kind of getting back into it. I think my next project I'm going to have to do it. So
I do like what you said though about how it feels like you've already written that story, because I've definitely had that experience as well, that you write an outline, you're like, oh well, I'm done now. Like I didn't get to do any of the fun stuff of like the cool like sentence work or like the character detail, but I feel like I know what this story is now. And so sometimes it can be like, I always tell myself, no matter how much I have an outline, I always allow it to go in a different direction if halfway through I realize, okay, this is a better direction for it. So always trying to give myself that space to say, this is not like I'm not set in stone with anything that I've outlined. And that's helped me. That way it's like kind of like side eye the outline, like, okay, like you're there, but I don't have to use you if I don't want to.
Yeah, I have a similar approach, and I think, that the minimum that I will know going in is I'll know the beginning, I'll know the ending, and I'll have some vague notion of the middle. That is the absolute minimum that I need to get started. But I do a similar thing to you in that there is always that leeway and that room to adjust if actually, a character or an idea comes to me and it's like, no, we're going to go on this little side quest. And it it is helpful, but it is also sometimes so time consuming because it's like, no, now you've gone, down into this town, you're off the map. You're off the map. I've put the GPS on, it's not even working anymore. So then I have to get myself out of that situation. And at that point I might have gone so deep into the woods to continue to use terrible analogies that
That's
it's like the original plan that I had, it doesn't even sync up. So that then there might be the possibility where I now have to replan the plan, and then that becomes very time consuming and complicated. But I think, that the point that we have to remember is that the story is king, and so as long as this is making for a better story, then we should do whatever is necessary. And
Mhm.
nothing in life was ever promised to you that it would be easy, and that is the same for novel writing.
Yes, and possibly doubly true for novel writing, because I do think it's vexing for writers. I'm sure there's someone out there. It's like novel writing's super easy, but I don't think most people feel that way. I feel like most authors definitely feel like it's challenging. It's rewarding, of course, but very challenging.
Yeah, yeah. Well, talking about things that are challenging, I know that over the last few years, a number of writers have had a tumultuous relationship with social media. It's been a very volatile
Yeah.
place to be. It's been a kind of confusing place to be, but there's that dichotomy because, in some aspects, you just want to be done with it altogether. In others, there's a potential benefit in terms of promoting your work, a benefit that some would argue is dwindling and becoming redundant. But I mean, you have scaled back your social media use so much. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that, about what you're doing in terms of social media and why you left certain platforms, why you scaled back. So let's go there.
Yeah, yeah. So I left Twitter at the end of 2022. So it's been over a year. And I actually just formally finally deleted it because I wanted to give myself that space to be like, am I going to go back? But then somebody I knew got hacked who was actually even still using it. And at that point, I'm like, okay, I haven't used it in over a year and I don't even want to risk it. So it's gone now. My Twitter is completely gone at this point. And it just became such a toxic platform in a lot of ways. And I know some people have been able to figure out kind of that way through, that they don't feel that it's as toxic, or they've been able to curate it. I tried doing that, it just never seemed to quite work for me. And after just everything with Elon Musk and just all of it, I was like, I'm I'm walking away from this. I'm walking into the sunset with this. And so now I'm on Facebook and Instagram. So I was always on Facebook, and I had an Instagram, but I never really used it until like 2022. And so that's really where I'm pretty active now. And I actually like Instagram. People seem to fight on it less, and that's nice because the fighting on social media is stressful. And so, like, I like that Instagram doesn't really reward that just because of the way the platform is. It's not like Twitter where you can have these long threads of people fighting. So, that's been nice. And it's also given me more time for reflection, more time for writing, and I'm still out there and I still have my blog, and I actually just started an author newsletter. So like that's a new venture. It's funny, I see a lot of authors doing that now. It felt like everybody had an author newsletter, then almost nobody did for a while, and now people are starting it again because social media has become so fragmented. And so that's been interesting. So like I'm eager to see how people kind of use that and see how I can kind of hopefully like connect with people through there as just like another outlet, because it is nice to connect with people, of course. I mean, it's nice to not feel like you're screaming into a void all the time, but at the same time, there is that kind of self-preservation because social media can be so negative so often.
Yeah, so I saw that you started a newsletter basically at the end of last year. And as you mentioned, I mean, you've got the blog, which has been continuous throughout all of this. I mean, particularly through putting out your submissions roundup, which everyone should check out. I mean, it's such a fantastically curated article every month in terms of letting people know where they can submit their short stories. And then, of course, you showcase other authors, kind of mini interviews and round tables.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think I've said it before, but it's been over 2 years. I can thank you once again for doing that. I think it is a fantastic asset to the community. But I'm wondering how the newsletter now fits in. Will you be duplicating some of the stuff that you're doing on the website? Is it all original content? How are you making that work for you?
I'm just starting it. And when I say just starting it, I'm probably sending out my first one next week. So it's like this is very, very new. I don't think I'll probably be one of those people that does a newsletter every month. Some people are really on top of it. Um, some of it'll be duplicated, so I'll probably include the submission roundup whenever I do that, just to remind people that it's there. Any kind of news, about releases, or just kind of like another place to do that. I don't always do a new blog when I have a new short story, and it would be nice to have some way of maybe putting that out there other than just one post on social media and being done, because sometimes it's nice to kind of get those short stories out there a little bit more. Yeah, I don't know. Like I'm eager to sign up for other people's newsletters and see maybe there'd be cross promotion opportunities with other people in their newsletters. I don't know. Like this is a whole new world for me. I'm trying to approach it with, yay, this is exciting, rather than, oh no, this is something I don't really know that much about.
Yeah, we're talking about cross promotion. I mean, I'd love to feature and reference your submissions roundup in our own newsletter if that's something that you're okay with. I'm sure you would be, like, you know if you weren't, then you'd have probably put the post on private, which would be really odd. I mean, it seems like a kind of Ebenezer Scrooge thing, doesn't it? It's like, I'm going to create this really useful thing, and now I'm
Don't
going to
share it
make
with
it
anyone.
private so no one can see it.
Yes, absolutely. Feel free to share it.
Yeah.
That sounds
Well,
like something Max Booth would do.
yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, tell everybody he's got a newsletter. It's set to private.
Yeah.
They tell him. They tell him, man, your newsletter's set to private. He'd be like, I know.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, something I've been doing particularly this year is really thinking about what is important to me and to my time. Like, I mean, personally and professionally, but I'll talk more professionally now. And I think with social media, as we mentioned before, it's been confusing, and so a lot of last year I was experimenting with TikTok because that was really taking off. But it honestly, to do it right, it's very, very time consuming.
Yeah.
It's gonna probably take, I don't know, over an hour each day just to put out
Mhm.
like a kind of less than 5 minute video. Because if you want it to do well, then I mean, first of all, you've got to decide what is the so called content. What is this video about? Even if I'm taking a clip from the podcast, well, I have to decide which 5 minutes of this 2 hour conversation is
Yeah.
going out. Then for it to perform, you've got to use various hashtags. It's a good idea to put subtitles on. And, like with a lot of things, you don't just want AI to be responsible for that, or
Yeah.
your guest is going to be saying some very strange things when you look at the subtitles. So
True.
I kind of reevaluated, as a lot of us do, going in to the new year, and I know what is important to me, and obviously it's my writing, it's the podcast, and it's learning Japanese. And so I set out some goals and some kind of minimum thresholds that I have to achieve every single day, something to do with the writing, something to do with learning Japanese, and something to do with podcasting. And once I have achieved all of those, I'm free to do whatever I like. And yeah, they're quite ambitious goals. So people may have noticed there has not been a single TikTok post this year because there hasn't been time.
Yeah.
But it's like, decide what you're going to do with your time, or someone else will decide for you. So I'm being very focused. So I don't know if some people think my relative silence is like, oh, what's going on with Michael? It's like, no, it's the opposite. I'm being super disciplined right now and doing the important stuff because it's what matters at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I think social media can, be such a place that can just a black hole for time, really. It just sucks it away. And like you said, especially with creating content, and it is creating content, all the posts are content. You do want them to look nice. You want it to, you want it to get engagement. You want it to be reflective of, who you are. And if you want to consider yourself a brand, or if you don't consider yourself a brand, it's all got to be reflective of that. And it can just suck up so much time. That's honestly why I haven't gotten on TikTok. I just felt like learning something like that, and then I know it's going to take up so much time, and I'm like, Instagram, that's just an image and occasionally video, as opposed to all video all the time, which just seems like a lot.
Yeah, I do think that video is becoming a more kind of predominant feature of social media. I think it will become more and more important, and that's why I experimented with it a lot. I mean, I still will put out video clips kind of on TikTok and Instagram, but I can't do it at a pace in which, like, TikTok would reward or would send you viral or
Yeah.
would make it into something where it could be monetized. And to be honest, I did see the numbers going up, and I saw the potential for me to monetize TikTok. So then I was getting addicted to it, putting more and more up. But I just thought, at the end of the day, it's like, was your dream to make money via TikTok when you were young? No, it
Yes.
wasn't, because I didn't have a power that told me one day there will be this social media platform called TikTok. There will be a lot of dancing women and weird content, but you will give writing advice, and you will become not rich, but you will
Yeah.
make a very modest salary. So go forth and do that. No, that wasn't my dream, so I stopped. doing the TikTok,
Yeah.
and yeah, it's too time consuming, and it's yeah, it's just not rewarding. Do I want at the end of my life people to say that they enjoyed my books, or do I want them to say, "Oh, I really liked that weird video with a Shrek that you did"? And maybe I want them to say both, but I'd prefer I prefer it to be mostly, centered around the fiction.
Yeah, and that's such a good point because that's something I think about a lot is like, what is it I'm trying to do here? Like, what is it that I want out of this? And so, yeah, like with social media, I'm like, I was never somebody that's like, oh, I can't wait to like, I don't know, get a whole bunch of attention for some, like you said, some weird video or something. Like, I that is something I do try to evaluate when looking at my time. I'm like, how much time do I want to spend here? Is this getting me closer to goals that like will make me happy? And trying to think about it in terms of that to some extent. Because sometimes, obviously, with every job and with everything we do, there are parts maybe you don't like as much or that are time consuming, but are worth it. And trying to always balance that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and talking about re-evaluating as we've just started a new year. Do you set New Year's goals? Do you reflect as you start the year? Is that something that you're into?
I definitely reflect. I mean I'm a very like, introspective person. Like I'm like one of those people who used to write in coffee shops and like stare out windows and I'm like it's so pretentious, but it is totally something that I have done. And so I do like to reflect and maybe not have New Year's resolutions because I feel like that just sets me up to fail. But I like the idea of being like, what did I accomplish last year? What worked? What didn't work? What directions do I want to take this year? And so, yeah, and especially this year professionally with the new novel coming out, I feel like that's a big centerpiece, right? Like last year was all short fiction and short nonfiction, so that was much more like, okay, this is going to be spread throughout the year. It's not going to be so focused on kind of one event, but then this year it's going to be all right. It's going to be focused on one event. It's even fairly early in the year in March, so it's like okay. And that kind of gives me some sense of like what the year will look like to at least some degree and trying to plan out, positive things, from the personal life perspective. I feel like my personal life can get gobbled up a lot by the professional stuff, but trying to make room for that.
Yeah, are there any things that you put in place to make sure that your personal life does exist to an extent? Or do you and your husband say, right, this is date night or anything along those lines?
It's actually funny right now. Like I always have my laptop for like video calls set up on a certain table. And like right now it's on top of a puzzle we're doing. And I love it because like there's always this like shorthand of puzzles with couples or like old couples. And I'm like, that's fine. I don't care. After the pandemic, like that's great. It's like fun and easy. We'll sometimes listen to podcasts while we're doing the puzzle. So that's definitely a thing we like to set aside the time for. So like literally my work is on top of the puzzle right now and probably tonight we'll take the laptop off and we'll do some more puzzles. So
Yeah, what kind of podcasts do you listen to?
some the one we're listening to right now is You Must Remember This. It's like a film podcast and so we're listening to the erotic 80s and erotic 90s like thrillers podcast. They have like a couple seasons of that, so it's like Fatal Attraction and Basic Instinct and stuff like that. I love those movies. I always say I love like
Yeah,
sleazy thrillers so much. I think they're so close to horror in a lot of ways. I consider
yeah,
Fatal Attraction horror. It's not supernatural, but it's
yeah.
it's got horrible things happening like murders and everything. So yeah, it's it's fun. It's fun listening to kind of the background on some of the movies. I'm a big film fan, and so I know a lot of like film history. But like it's been fun. Some of the things she goes really deep into the history of a lot of movies. So it's fun to hear that.
Yeah, I gotta check that out. It basically sounds like the kind of Adrian Lin era of filmmaking. So, yeah, and is there like, is there a kind of season to the podcast. And so like right now it's the erotic 80s
Yeah.
and 90s, but then there's different
Yes.
subgenres.
So, like, I first heard about it. She did one on Charles Manson's Hollywood. So, like, the Hollywood in the late 60s. I'm also a big Sharon Tate fan. And so that was how I
Mm.
first heard about it. This was a number of years ago. She's done other ones since then. And then she did the erotic 80s. And then I think she just finished up the erotic 90s season. So, yeah, each season it can be very different than the last.
Oh, this sounds really good.
Mm-hmm.
Might have to buy a puzzle and create the Gwendolyn Kiste the date
Yes.
night experience.
Yes.
Get that copyrighted.
That's
Yeah, I'm
amazing.
definitely going to check that out. It sounds like they're kind of hitting on what I call basically like American Giallo. So, you know,
Yeah.
uh,
Mhm.
there's a lot
Yeah.
of that. More kind of lean into the erotic instead of the esoteric. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that very much. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that genre is right up both mine and Bob's street. We often give each other recommendations in
Mm.
that category as well. It's just so good. And like you say, it's so close to horror. I mean, I cast a really wide definition of horror. So just like kind of dark, creepy,
Mhm.
voyeuristic stuff happening. It's like, come on, that is horror.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I agree. I know some people have very narrow definitions. It's like horror can only be this, but I'm always like bring everything because I feel like it's such a maligned genre so often. So I'm like, let's bring more in because the more we have in, it's like this is a very wide net of ideas and feelings. Like you said, it could be a feeling, it could be a theme, it could be, it could be people getting slashed up. I mean, there's so many different ways you can define horror. And so I'm always
Mm-hmm.
like, bring it all, bring it all. Remember once I heard somebody say, I probably actually said this on the show before because I'm always stunned at this. Somebody once called like The Exorcist a drama because it was nominated for Oscars. So they wanted to be like, it's a drama. This is just like some discourse on like some random blog. I don't even know where, but I like still remember this because I'm like, the Exorcist is so obviously horror. Like there's nothing else. I mean, if you want to say it's horror and drama, if you want to add an extra genre, that's fine. But I was like, I feel like as soon as something becomes respectable, they try to take it away from the horror genre. Oh, it can't possibly be horror. It got Oscar nominations. It's like, no, it doesn't work like that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we've definitely said this before, but there are some people who they've decided that their default position is that they don't like horror. So then, if they like a horror movie or a horror book, rather than saying, "Okay, this is the exception," they then play a linguistic game to
Mhm. Mhm.
redefine it and to absolutely justify why this can't be horror.
Mm-hmm.
So then they're
Yes.
just using the word horror as a stand-in for stuff I don't like, which is weird. It's like that's not
Yeah.
what horror means.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because sometimes I'll meet somebody, and this hasn't happened in years because after the pandemic, I don't have to randomly meet people as much anymore. But like back when I had to randomly meet people more and be like, oh, I don't like that slasher stuff. And I'm like, that's fine. That doesn't mean you don't like horror. I like slasher films, but like if you don't, you can still like horror. You might still like something like The Haunting of Hill House, whether the book or the TV series or one of the movies. Like there's so many different forms of horror. And so it's like, yeah, I think some people are like, I don't like that one kind of horror, and therefore I like no horror. And it's not true. It's not true. You might like something
Mm-hmm.
else. And we don't have to,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
we're preaching to the choir here, right? I don't feel like anyone listening to this show is going to be like, I hate horror.
Yeah, I mean, it would be a very strangely titled podcast to tune into, but I mean, one of the reasons that I think This Is Horror has been around for so long and that we always enjoy doing this and we feel that it's always fresh is because we have such a wide definition
Yeah.
of horror. I mean, if we
Mhm.
were just like, no, it's slashers or monsters and that's it, then we
Yeah.
wouldn't be able to talk to many people and be like, sorry, your book isn't horror. It's like it's there on the bookshelf under horror. It's like, no, fake news. I think that was photoshopped. So, yeah.
And I think that's really true. I've always noticed that over the years with the show and with the website. You guys are always promoting so many different horror authors and so many different types of horror. So I've always appreciated that.
Yeah, well,
We're gonna
thank you.
rebrand it. This is Slasher. This is Slasher. Yeah.
Yeah. If we do that, then Stephen Graham Jones might try and buy out This Is Slasher. It's like, no, I'm taking control of this ship.
Yeah.
I do feel like he's so synonymous with that now. Like he is like the slasher king. Like there is no one that does slasher horror like Stephen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's true. I mean, he is so known for slasher, but at the same time, if you look at his repertoire, if you even look from book to book, they're so different. There's such
Yes.
a range. There's such a versatility. So he he is the slasher king, but he's also just the horror god. Calling him
Yeah.
a king and a god, he's gonna really have an inflated ego. But I mean, I think that there's probably no subject that he couldn't write about. I mean, he
I'd
wrote
agree with
an
that.
entire book called Zombie Bake Off. Case
Read that one.
closed.
I haven't read that one. I know he did that great werewolf book, Mongrels. That was like
Yeah,
10 years ago now. I can't believe how long ago that probably was now. But yeah, so it's like
Mhm.
he does have such range. He does have such range.
yeah, yeah. Well, Zombie Bake Off, it was a bit before Mongrels. This was
Okay.
in 2012, and the short pitch is essentially Bake Off meets the WWE. So basically, pro wrestling and Bake Off. So
Mhm.
for the fans of his kind of more literary horror, such as Mongrels and the current Indian Lake trilogy, it's different. It's different, but if you want to see the range, then pick up a copy of Zombie Bake Off. I can't believe that 12 years later, surprise, I'm promoting it on This Is Horror. I haven't referenced it for over a decade.
That's amazing. I love that.
Yeah, he taps into so many areas, like the least of my scars. It came from Del Rio. I mean, I'm everyone who listens knows I'm not like the biggest fan of slashers. I love what he's doing with slashers. I love the books. But you know, I came into his work before he was just writing like basically what we would call dark fiction. It was horror, but it was like it was
Mm-hmm.
more of a darker nature,
Yeah.
and just to see him progress.
Hmm.
If 15 years ago, if you said, "Hey, Stephen Graham Jones is going to be the slasher king," I'd have been like, I don't know about all that, but he's got some horror in him, and now it's like, oh, he's the slasher king, the horror god.
His
Yeah.
career has been so wonderful to watch because I've been in this industry for almost 10 years now, and it's like he was big when I came in, but he's so much bigger now, and it's just been exciting to watch that and to watch
Mm-hmm.
that progression. And that's sort of like I feel like that's what so many authors are like hoping for, right? That like you can have that career that's doing well, but then really, really, takes it to the next level.
Mm-hmm. Every once in a while, you come across somebody like in a bookstore. It's like, have you heard this guy, this new guy, this Stephen Graham Jones? I'm like, no, yes, I have. He's not new. Let's go to the
Right.
let's go to the section over here and let's take a look at all the books.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there was a period of about a decade ago now where he was writing like 3 or 4 books a year. I mean, his agent actually had to slow him down. It's like you can't publish that amount of books in a year. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. He might still be writing at that rate. He's just not putting them out. He could take a break and then they could release 50 books and then he'll come back and he's like, right, well, I had a nice vacation. But I mean, talking about like breakthroughs or leveling up, for want of better phrasing. So, I mean, in the time since you were last on the show, as you mentioned, you released Reluctant Immortals. Am I right in thinking, was that the first book with Simon and Schuster?
Yes, yes. And then Velkwood is the second one. Yes, correct. Yep.
Yeah, so obviously that is quite significant. So how did you come to be working with Simon and Schuster?
Yeah, so I'm working with Saga Press, and yeah, just my editor Joe Monti reached out to me right at the beginning of the pandemic, and he was a fan of my first book, The Rust Maidens, and we just talked, and yeah, and ended up with the two books. Yeah, so very exciting, very it's interesting because like it's different, but there's a lot of similarities. I mean, I feel like, publishing is publishing. So there's a lot of similarities, from going from kind of indie small presses to a bigger publisher. So it's not as different as maybe like I didn't know what to expect of how much of a difference there would be. But, there's a lot of crossover. There's a lot of similarities. But it's very exciting. Saga Press has put out a lot of great books, including all of Stephen Graham Jones's recent book. So it's exciting to be part of that group of authors.
Yeah, and for people listening who were hoping they could glean a tip, it's like, no, essentially what you do is you write a good book and then the editor reads it and he contacts you. That I mean, like in a way, it seems like, a joke, or that we're messing with people, but actually in many ways it's kind of how it goes. It's like, just keep writing the best work that you can. And then, eventually, like word of mouth and things, it's going to pick up, and then someone will contact you.
Yeah.
That is so often how these opportunities come about.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I feel is probably the most surprising. Like I said, I've been doing this for about 10 years now. And I mean, writing for a lot longer, but doing it on a kind of professional, trying to get published sort of way for 10 years. A lot of things are random. I really thought that it would be more like, okay, you take step one and then step two and then step three, and there would be a clearer trajectory, but there's really not. It really is. There's a lot of random, run-ins with people or meeting people or being in the right place at the right time. But like you said, I think the core of everything is just keep working, just keep writing the best work that you can at whatever level you're at, self-publishing, small press, it's all good. As long as you're putting out, the best work that you can, and things will happen. Things will happen. There's no rhyme or reason or when they're going to happen, but things just keep moving. Because I always say to my husband, there'll be like a lull and I won't know what's coming next. And it's always just like, there's this thing. Grew up. I was a really big fan of the Beatles. I'm still a fan of the Beatles, but Paul McCartney shared this story, and he shared it several times about how like the Beatles like crashed on the side of like this snowy road on the way to a concert or something, and like they were like down an embankment. It was really harrowing. It's like a horror story, right? And they like get out, and like nobody can see them from like where they crashed, and nobody's hurt, but they're like, oh my gosh, it's like this snowy moment, and like, how are we going to get out of this? And one of them just said, something will happen. And something did happen. Somebody happened to see them, came down, gave them a ride to where they needed to go, and everything was fine. And, this was at the start of their career, so clearly they became the Beatles after that, right? But I love the core of that story of something will happen. Something will happen. I mean, you can't always rely completely on that, but I do use that when I'm like, what's going to happen next? I don't know. Something will happen. Just keep working. Just keep trying. Just keep putting yourself out there. Something will happen.
Yeah, yeah, and I feel too, and I mean this applies very heavily to the Beatles because they were amongst some of the kind of hardest workers in terms of like the hours that they were putting in, the constant gigging, the songs that they were writing, and I feel the more that you just kind of go at it and you put work out there and you write, there's never a guarantee of success, but the more you do, it's like you're buying a ticket to the success lottery. Then the more tickets you've got, the more
Yes.
chance of something happening. So you might as well keep going. And I mean, at the moment, I've only got 3 books out there. I got a number of short stories as well, but I mean, I would say that the first one, the girl in the video, that really tapped into something and took off. But the other two, they haven't quite took off in that way. I mean, they've certainly got good reviews, they've got interest, but there was something that the girl in the video hit on. And so, it very much depends on how you're built. But I could see somebody thinking, like, I had it and now it's gone, and feeling very dispirited. But I mean, I don't feel like that at all, because I mean, first of all, I think that I'm always improving as a writer. And I don't know if I should say this, but then because I'm always improving, I would say that from a technical point of view, that the other two books are better written than the girl in the video. And really, like, getting better is what matters. But then at the same time, I know that there are little things going on in the background that are going to happen in the future that I can't quite talk about, but I'm very, very excited about them. And then, you know if something big happens, then that can bring attention to the rest of your work. So it's like this journey, it has barely even begun. If we want to take the driving metaphor, which is apparently the route that I want to take today, then it's like I'm just going down my road. So we're nowhere near where we're going. So too many people, and we spoke about this with Eric LaRocca, they will deem something to have been a flop, or a failure, or it didn't live up to what they wanted it to be. And it's like, we haven't even started. It's
Yeah.
like you can't judge, your success before you've got to the end. And I
Mhm.
mean, so many times, like I like to use the example of Josh Malerman's Bird Box, and when it was picked up for Netflix, I mean, Josh was doing pretty well before, but as soon as that came out on Netflix, the sales and the recognition of his books, they just absolutely rocketed.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that happened, a number of years after the
Yeah.
book had came out. So it's just disingenuous and being too hard on yourself to label something, a failure, or to be disappointed when the journey hasn't begun. This is very much a long game that we're playing here.
It is, and I think of that. I think about that a lot, and I even think of it like that in my head of like, this is a long game. You got to play a long game. This isn't something that you're gonna. I think sometimes people like see somebody who had like one hit book, like the Harper Lee with to Kill a Mockingbird, like, oh, I'm gonna live off the royalties of one book. It's like that's even in her time, that was like unheard of. Nobody did that but her, right? So it's like, that's it's more about building a career than maybe just having, one or two big books. It is about that kind of, it's about the community building, it's about getting to know people, it's about being kind of part of the genre, which I think is fun because most of us love the genre, right? So getting to meet other people in the genre and getting to collaborate on different things, being on panels, going to things, like it's fun doing things like this, being on awesome podcasts. This is wonderful. Like it's a great way of really being part of the community and being part of this longer journey. Like you said, we're just getting started. Wherever you're at, you're probably
Hmm.
just getting started.
Yeah, I've been doing this stuff since the late '80s. So just to let you know how old I am. I've gotten so many rejections.
Yeah.
Used to have rejections in a little shoebox that I lost, but I had stacks of them, and I hated to even look at them because some of them were harsh.
Yeah.
Michael may remember a magazine called New Blood that came out, and I got probably one of the harshest short story rejections in my life, and so here I am now. I'm going to be 57 this year, and the way that I feel about it is all that longevity. I've got, a Mojo Rising out. I got They're Watching with Michael. I have other projects in there, and the way I feel about it, even though I've been doing this, I'm just getting warmed up.
Yeah.
I am just getting started. And if you have that kind of attitude, then the road will take you wherever you want to go. You just have to put in the work, you know. And so that's just how I feel about it. I think that's a great mantra to have. It's I'm just getting warmed up. I remember Doug Morano last year on social media was talking about, well, where I want to see the older people, the
Yes.
60 and 70-year-old people who are just starting something that is going to change, their lives for the better.
Yeah.
And that post went viral, but it
Yeah.
hit me. I was like, man, dude, that's me. That's me right there. You know,
Yeah.
I'm just I don't see no way that I can give this up. It's too much of a passion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think
and
I
I
remember
think
seeing that post too, and I love the idea of it so much because it is too much of a focus on just being young. And there's nothing wrong with that focus too. I don't want to be like, oh, if you're young and just getting started, you don't deserve any attention. It's not that, but I do think there's this disproportionate attention paid to people
Mhm.
at like earlier stages. And it's like some people, for a lot of different reasons, can't get started until they're older. They need to, get to a place where they have maybe more stability or, have that time to do it. And so I think it's important to kind of keep that open. Plus, the older you get, I think the more life experience hopefully you get, and hopefully the more perspective you have on things. And I think that it can be very interesting. Again, this is
Hmm.
not to disparage younger people. Obviously, they have, when we're all young, we have a unique perspective then too. But I think that, throughout the life cycle, you're going to have different takes on even the same subject because even just in the 10 years I've been doing this, I feel like I can go back to some of my earlier themes and kind of write a short story that's almost a in conversation with something I wrote previously from a different perspective now that I'm older, now that I have kind of this different outlook on things. So it's almost like my work is in conversation with itself because I've changed over the course of 10 years. And so I feel
Hmm.
like that's really important to be able to have those stories from people throughout their life and why it's just so meaningful to literature in general.
Hmm. I think it's important to know too that if people try to write within their age, they try to write characters within their age and stuff like that.
Yes.
And most of my stories, if I had to age my characters, with the exception of a handful, most of my characters are probably in their mid to late 20s to early 30s. And I think it's because I work with the public, and that's probably the biggest demographic of people I come in contact with. And so I know those people, and plus I used to be that old, even though it was 30 years ago, but I used to be that old. Things hadn't really changed that much, but at the same time, things have changed a lot.
Yeah.
So it's like
Hmm.
you don't necessarily just because you're older, then you have to write about old stoggy old folks, you know. But there's something about the possibility of writing something like in a senior citizen with senior citizens characters that you don't see in horror.
Yeah.
I've got something I've been working on with that, and it's just just to have older characters, um, which I'm having to kind of do some research on because I feel like I'm so young at heart. So I don't know how old people act. I don't know. I don't know.
I
Really
love
don't.
that. I love that. I agree though. And like something that I'm realizing as I'm getting older, I'm in my late 30s now. And, I want to see more stories, told about women in their 30s and 40s and 50s because a lot of women, there are a lot of female characters in horror, but they're mostly teenagers and in their 20s. Now, a lot of the male characters are too. So this isn't something that it's like, oh, we have tons of older male characters. Most of the characters, like you said, a lot of the characters in horror are younger. But it is something I'm kind of challenging myself to because when I first started, it was like, okay, I'm kind of always writing people in their teens and their 20s and that kind of coming of age because I think that's a place where we really like to write as authors because it is a time of change and you want to have change in your story. So there's a natural kind of moment there. But then the older I get, the more I think we kind of have more than one coming of age, anyways. As we get older, we go through these periods where it's like we change again and it's like, whoa, I feel really different now we always want to say it's like a midlife crisis, but what if it's just a second coming of age? Wouldn't coming of age when you're a teenager, wouldn't adolescence just be a teenage crisis, right? Like I feel like we go through these kind of inflection points as human beings, and that is something I'm thinking about a lot more in my writing. And that was something with Velkwood. They're like 40. All the characters in the present day in the story are like 40 years old. And I'm like, this is good because it like, I'm always leaning on this idea. When I wrote Rust Maidens, there was the modern part of it, and she was in her 40s, but the bulk of that book was, when they were teenagers. And it's like I always kind of leaned on that. And as I'm getting older, I'm like, okay, there need to be more stories with older characters in horror. So it's like this is a place I'm like, okay, I'm going to challenge myself to do this. And it isn't my comfort zone, but I think horror is a place to get outside your comfort zone anyway. So I feel like it's a natural fit.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, talking of changes, you were saying before that when you moved to Saga Press, that in many ways there weren't so many changes from being an indie author to being with one of the big publishers. But I mean, I'm wondering of the changes that there were, what they were, because I imagine there could have been some differences in terms of the back and forth with the editor. Perhaps there are changes in the way in which you even initially pitch an idea. And then I'm particularly interested in the promotional and the marketing side of things, particularly with you now not being on social media so much.
I'm still on Instagram a lot. I am still there a lot. And I'm actually still on Facebook a decent bit. Facebook's so fragmented, so it's kind of hard to get out to people within a very narrow market. With editorial stuff, I worked directly with my editor. And so there was, back and forth. There was like a round of developmental edits on each book, and then, copy edits, a couple round of copy edits. One of the biggest differences, and this would be, through that process of copy editing, although I had this at other presses as well, that, you have several more people. There's a lot more people kind of involved at the big four, big five level. You have, maybe a couple more copy editors, or, you obviously have a publicist and a marketer. And, when you're doing the cover design, you have several people, that you're not going to really probably work with beyond that moment. And so it's like at a small press, you might know everybody, but maybe at a larger press, you're only talking to somebody a few times. And that's about it, because that's what they do. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's the biggest difference, is just that there's a lot more people involved in every single book, as opposed to a small press when a lot of times it's two or three people and they're doing everything. I'm trying to think of like what else I would really say. I feel like those are the biggest differences about it. There can be a bigger budget in terms of being able to promote it. That can certainly, be the case. But I actually, like I said, I do think that there's, a lot of crossover with it. It's publishing is publishing all over, which is interesting to me. It wasn't necessarily, like I said, what I was expecting, but it has been at least my experience so far.
And in terms of when you're setting out to write a new novel, do you consult a lot with your agent or your editor before you put pen to paper, or is it a case of you decide what you want to write and then you tell them?
So I've never had an agent. That's still a thing for me. I've never had a literary agent.
Ah,
So
okay.
I definitely don't talk to an agent. Uh,
Yeah.
maybe someday, I don't know. But with the second book, so the Saga press deal was a 2-book deal. I don't know how other people do it, but with this, I was just like, I'm gonna have a book over to you at this point, and then I sent the book over to my editor. There was no, I don't think I sent a description of it. I literally just sent it, and so there was like no. I don't. Now that I'm thinking about it, maybe there could have been more conversation. I'm not sure, but that was how I did it. Sometimes I feel like I'm a little too Wild West with the way I approach my career, because it's kind of like, hey, how am I feeling today? I think I'm going to go in this direction. So that probably isn't how other people do it, but it's at least how I've done it so far. With Reluctant Immortals, I did pitch that. So for the 2 book deal, that was pitched. There was a long outline that was a lot more involved. But for the second book, it was interesting. That one took a little bit longer to kind of come together. Reluctant Immortals came together a lot quicker, but Haunting of Velkwood was a little bit more difficult. It's a lot more emotional. It's a lot more, dark and traumatic than maybe Reluctant Immortals, which I always said Reluctant Immortals felt more to me like I was writing a Hammer movie. And I love Hammer films, and they're light and they're fun and there's like an adventure. And so that was fun and easy to write. It was in the 1960s. It was even kind of that era of Hammer films. So like that was kind of going back to almost this like comfort food when it came to horror for me. Whereas Velkwood's much darker. It's, there's a lot of trauma, there's a lot of secrets, and this haunted neighborhood that's like, got like holding all these ghosts, and it was darker and it was harder to write. So I think that one just took a little bit longer to kind of come together. And maybe that was why I didn't pitch it ahead of time. I'm like, here, just have this thing. Here is this thing I have finally finished. Please take it away from me.
So you never mentioned having an agent, which makes sense given that you don't. But I guess because you were now with Simon and Schuster, I had the misconception because, like, even with Gemma Moore, when she got the deal with Angry Robot, she didn't have an agent, but then she got one kind of as part of negotiating that deal. But I can see too, as a businessman, how it's like, well, if I've got this deal, why would I then want to introduce a third party who's going to take a cut? I got the bloody deal. If you got the deal, then it's a bit different, but I'm not going to just get you so that you can take this cut. And I did almost have a similar situation like that. In fact, I was talking to an agent and then they wanted to kind of come in at the contract negotiation stage, and it's like, no, 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 no. You find me a deal for my next book. I found this bloody deal. Anyway, it didn't work out. I rejected that agent and
Mhm.
feel good about that. But I feel, yeah, I'd like you to talk in a way on like the dichotomy as to whether to or not to get an agent. And I mean, are there any factors or situations that would lead you to seek out an agent?
Yeah, I mean, I'm open to it. It's kind of like what you said. I felt like the deal came to me. I talked it out. There's benefits to it. Obviously with all the legalese that's in contracts, there's definitely a benefit in that. And yeah, so I do have a film agent that I work with for film options, and so it's very different from literary. But yeah, so I mean that especially because like I feel like in a lot of ways the contracts for novels are just blown up bigger versions of short story contracts. So yes, there's a lot more there, and yes, I definitely feel like a literary agent could have helped me with navigating some of those specifics. But film options, that's a whole nother ballgame. I worked as an independent filmmaker, but like that's very different than a film option contract. So like that was someplace that I'm like, yes, I am happy to have somebody else take care of this kind of stuff for me because like, oh boy, like that's a lot of stuff that I didn't even necessarily understand some of the language and the contract for Velkwood and Reluctant Immortals. I at least understood all the language. I understood all the clauses and everything, as opposed to I don't understand everything with Hollywood at all. So that's different. And so I can very much see, being able to navigate that. And I'm open to it in the future. It's more like what you said. I don't really want to run all my ideas by somebody else. Like I think that's a lot of it. I don't want it to be like I don't want to come up with an idea and I'm really excited about it. I'm ready to start and I happen to mention it to an agent. Like, that's not selling right now. Don't write that. Like that's kind of like a fear I have. I think a good agent wouldn't do that, but I've heard a lot of horror stories over the years or agents that won't let somebody have their work in translation because they're not getting enough money for it. And just things that like I feel like I've seen people, they get literary agents and the literary agent really starts taking a lot of control. And again, like I said, I kind of have a little bit of a Wild West approach about things, just kind of like freewheeling, like whatever. And I like that because I feel like this is a creative industry and I like to have that freedom. And so that's always my concern. And that's a thing of like, okay, I need to know that this isn't going to be, I'm not going to be micromanaged. You know, if I'm going to be micromanaged, I'm just going to go get a 9 to 5 job that I can leave at the end of the day. I don't have to have social media for, I don't have to do all of this other stuff for. I want to feel like, you know, this gets to be creative and gets to be fun. So that's one of the things for me. And again, I think, you know, your mileage may vary. I know there are people that have agents that are great and that work with them and are very much, you know, the cheerleaders, the people who are, you know, rooting them on and everything. And then there's definitely agents that have not treated people like that. So I think it is a matter of finding the right one.
Yeah, it seems like we're in quite a similar situation in terms of agents because I do have a film agent as well, and in many senses, I think that's why I haven't got a literary agent at the moment because I've almost got the best of both worlds. Because the way that it works with
Mm-hmm.
him is I send him every book I write anyway. So I get
Mm-hmm.
feedback on that, I get thoughts on that, I get ideas as to how that might work better, both in terms of improvements to the book and how it might translate if we were to try and sell it for the screen. And then
Mm-hmm.
also, as part of having the film agent, I've now got an entertainment lawyer who looks at contracts. So even
Yeah.
like
Mm-hmm.
I don't know necessarily what the rules are here, but if I get a book contract that I'm not so sure about, I send it to him and ask him what he thinks. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
you know, there's limited need at the moment for where I am in my career to have a literary agent. It's like I'm open to the idea, and if
Mm-hmm.
someone
Mm-hmm.
listening has an offer that they think I can't refuse, well, give it me and we'll see if I do or don't refuse it. But yeah, like, and I think as well, if we're happy with where we are and the path that we're on, then
Mm-hmm.
it's
Mm-hmm.
always a bit of a gamble to introduce a new element or a
Yeah.
wild card.
Yeah, exactly. And that for me is just like I'm good right now. Like it, you know, next book, I don't know. Like I'm very open to like I said, but it's just I'm not I've seen people that all they're worried about is getting that literary agent. And it's like I'm much more worried about getting my work out there. That to me is much more important than a literary agent. I feel like that can be a step along the way. That can absolutely be part of it. But I feel like, you know, again, just getting my work out there is much more of what I want to do. And I feel like so far so good anyways.
Yeah, yeah, and one kind of note, particularly for people who are chasing getting a literary agent almost to the point of absurdity, is that every literary agent is not created equally. There are
Yes.
some very, very good literary agents who
Mhm.
will champion you and your work and will get you amazing deals. There are also other literary agents who are frankly doing more harm than good,
Yes.
and there isn't necessarily a unified qualification or a process for becoming a literary agent. So some
Yes.
people are literary agents because they decided they were going to say that they were a literary agent. So,
Yes.
you know,
Mhm.
do your research. If
Mhm.
there's an agent that piques your curiosity, absolutely talk to current or former clients, get a sense as to what they can and what they can't do for you.
Yeah.
But also, even before that, think about why you want a literary agent and what it is you want them to do for you. If you can do that without a literary agent, then maybe this isn't right for you. But as soon as you focus on your specific need, then you can see if that agent is a good fit. So for
Yes.
me, I don't need them to do anything with film because I've already got that agent. I'm very, very happy with that relationship. But actually, something that I would be interested in is getting my work into foreign markets, into like translated versions. So if there was an agent that particularly specializes in that, then
Mhm.
that would
Mhm.
be like a kind of huge plus for me. I mean, I would even consider if such a thing exists, somebody who they specifically do that. That is their function, and then I'd be happy for them to take a cut because,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, I'm not really doing that much at all at the moment, so that's something that they could bring that I'm currently not doing.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that's such a good point of knowing what it is you want and being able to identify those areas. And that's something that I actually am glad that I have more of an understanding as to what I want now than I did when I first started. Because I think if I would have tried to get a literary agent right at the beginning, and I did have a book like a long time ago that I tried to, but it was terrible. So like I don't, it was rightfully turned down. That was well over a decade ago. So I guess I've been doing this technically longer than 10 years. I guess I always say 10 years because that was when my first short story was published. But there was a few years before that that I did write a really bad sci-fi novel, which is funny. Like, and it was great practice. And I did the whole agent thing and everybody rejected it. And I'm very glad because I would not have wanted that to be my first novel. The thought of anything but The Rust Maidens being my first novel is horrifying now. But yeah, like, and I had no idea what I wanted at that point. I didn't even fully understand what a literary agent did or what you could do on your own or what the difference is between, big four, big five publishing and indie press or small press versus self publishing. And it's like, so it was good. Like that whole experience of going through that and failing and then continuing to move forward was a very good one. Like it can be so good to fail. Like nobody wants to fail at the time. At the time, it's terrible. But like in the long run, so often failure. I mean, I've heard people say this: that you learn so much more from failure than you ever learn from success. You don't like, yay, I succeeded. You tend to learn from failures. That tends to be the place where you start understanding things better. So, yeah.